Thank you for learning Siebel with the Siebel Hub. We have a unique, comprehensive and always up-to-date collection of Siebel CRM 2021 training classes. We can deliver live online and on-site training in the highest quality with the most experienced instructors. And we also offer a unique modular Siebel CRM 20 and 21 training. Follow the links in the description or on this slide to learn more and learn Siebel with the Siebel Hub. Hello and welcome to this presentation of the Siebel 21.3 update summary. So 21.3 has been released on March 18th, and let's take a look at some of the highlights of this new Siebel CRM update. So the first feature we're going to take a look at is the new 64-bit Java support for IMAP and POP3 drivers, which changes the way we use the Siebel email response module. We discuss the performance enhancements that Oracle has made for multi-language deployments when it comes to delivering workspaces. So that's a change for the development environments. There has been an update to the OpenUI framework as to now control labels identify a reference as the applet ID. The AI Tomcat now supports officially compression of static content, so that's documented in Bookshelf now. The post-install database update no longer automatically runs the repository upgrade feature, so you can run this manually and optionally. There has been a new parameter in the REST API for business services called Legacy. We'll take a look at that. And a change in the security adapter. If you run the database security adapter in SSO mode, there's a new security adapter mode value, DBSSO, that you need to set for your components. So there's plenty of new features and enhancements in 21.3, so let's take a closer look. In 21.2 or prior, the integration with email servers in the email response module was through a 32-bit JRE support and used 32-bit Java. So with 21.3 this changes, and now the email integration is handled by the 64-bit Java engine that comes with the SES Tomcat. So all outbound and inbound communication in email response is now through the SES Tomcat and hence requires 64-bit Java capabilities. Administrators need to be prepared to make a few changes to the system, such as importing the root CA certificates of the mail server into the SES Tomcat JKS Trust stores, to configure the SMTP, IMAP, POP3 server driver profiles in the Siebel application, and maybe more. So this is documented in the email administration guide and also on Oracle support. So here we have the email administration guide from March 2021, the Bookshelf guide. And so if you take a look at the What's New chapter, which is always recommended to scan the What's New chapters in the new Bookshelf version, then you find there's a new chapter on the 64-bit JRE support for IMAP and POP3. So take a moment, of course, if you use this feature to reflect on these changes. When you have installed multiple languages, then whenever you deliver a workspace, the changes are compiled for each language individually, and until 21.2 this was done sequentially, resulting in long publishing or delivery times when you have more than one language. So Oracle has changed this in 21.3, so now workspace publishing is happening in parallel for the languages. This improves the performance, of course, and with this comes a new system preference named Enable Concurrent WS Deliver, which even if not set defaults to true, so the default behavior is executing Workspace publishing in parallel, you can set the system preference to false to switch back to the old behavior if required. In OpenUI, the control labels, the labels that are side by side with controls on form applets, they have caused some headaches for developers ever since because they were not easy to spot. And now with 21.3, this seems to be resolved, as now the control label identifiers include the name of the control followed by underscore label underscore and followed by what is the applet identifier, which is a sequential number like a 1 or 2. So each label has a unique ID, which is a change that has been introduced earlier. But the change in 21.3 is that the aria labeled by attribute of the corresponding control is actually reflecting the label ID properly. So now developers shouldn't have a hard time identifying the label for any given control. But if there is any legacy JavaScript code, custom JavaScript code that refers to those label IDs by just looking for, let's say, underscore label as a suffix, then this code needs to be reconsidered or rewritten to honor the new naming convention. We are all familiar with the post-install database setup utility, or PIDs or PIDs, which was introduced in 20.3, so 1 year ago. It manages the post-update processing that needs to happen in terms of importing additional seed data that is necessary to support some of the new features, to make repository changes, and so forth. As until 21.2, the PIDs also included and executed the repository upgrade utility. This is no longer the case as of Bookshelf. The installation guide tells us that the post-install database setup utility no longer runs repository upgrade. So this has become now an optional manual task. So the MDE, the Modular Deployment Engine, which updates your environment to 21.3, includes the post-install database setup utility. You can opt out of that and run it manually. But after you have run the two, MDE and PIDs, which is mandatory, then in a DR environment, you can, if desired, run the repository upgrade utility manually. And this is now documented in the installation guide and upgrade guide, how to actually do that. You would take a look at the release notes, where there is a column for each feature, repository upgrade required. And if it says yes, and if you are in a situation where you need these repository updates in your development environment, then you have a situation where you would actually need to run the repository upgrade utility. When you run the repository upgrade utility, what you get is a new integration workspace that is automatically created with a developer workspace underneath, which has all the features that are accumulated since 20.3. So I have run this on a 20.11. I've updated to 21.3, and I've run the repository upgrade utility manually, and it created a huge workspace with all the repository objects that have been accumulated since 20.3 to 21.3. So this is then delivered into that integration workspace, and developers can then inspect and verify, and of course also deliver that integration workspace into the project workspace, which is their own integration or main. And there could be a certain amount of rebasing necessary, or maybe using ZIF files to only export from that automatically created workspace what you really want. So it's a manual decision, it's a manual process. There is also a datamig.imp file created along the process, which you can find in the log directory. And this file assists with migrating the seed data that also go with the repository upgrade, like list of values and views, etc. Assists them to use them in the migration application, because the migration application will of course take care of the repository changes with the migration repository services, but you also need to migrate the seed data using the application data service, and that's why this datamake IMP file is really helpful. The REST API has gotten a tiny little update in 21.3 with a new parameter, legacy is it by name, which is used when you are accessing Siebel Business Services through the Service API. When you specify that parameter as shown on the screen, you actually no longer have to provide the input property set wrapped in a body element. So on the left-hand side, you see the old way without the legacy parameter, and even in 21.3 and higher, if you don't specify the parameter, you still have to wrap the input property set in a body. And you see the run in Postman of that request to the Siebel account business service query by example. It returns an integration object hierarchy, but you also notice that when you set legacy to y, lowercase y, that's the value, then the body is not required. And also you get the typical integration object structure with list of account, for example. So the list of elements are included in the response as well. So the legacy parameter not only changes the way you provide the input to a business service in a more legacy way, so you don't have that body wrapper, but the output will also be more similar to legacy SOAP responses, let's call it that, in that it includes the list of elements. And back in 20.10, in October 2020, we welcomed the changes to the database security adapter, which since then supports SSO mode. So there is a single sign-on flag now. It's an advanced parameter, and you have a shared username, trust token, and all that. So you can run a database security adapter in SSO mode. As of 21.3, this is still possible. But if you use one of these adapters specified in the security adapter name component parameter, you need to set the security adapter mode component parameter to dbSSO, not db as it were in prior versions. Oracle does not recommend database SSO for production environments, by the way, as they state in Bookshelf. So to put this to a conclusion, 21.3 has a lot of features, and it might be the first release where you encounter the modular deployment engine. So make sure you also get informed about what the modular deployment engine brings. Check out the Siebel Hub YouTube videos on 21.2 for the MDE, and also check out the Siebel Hub training options in the descriptions. The link is in the descriptions below. So how do you get to 21.2 or higher? So let's say you want to update to 21.3 and your prior version is between 17.0 and 21.1. So we presume you are already upgraded to IP17 or a higher version, so you don't need to run an upgrade. You just, well, download the MDE zip files, extract them, and run the MDE to update your environment to 21.3. That would include the SES, AI servers, gateway servers, which will do a binary update. And actually, as it is MDE, and if it's your first MDE update, it will create a new directory structure. And also on Windows, for example, replace the Tomcat services with a new version, and that would also result in a renaming of the Tomcat services on Windows. And on Windows clients as well, with Siebel Tools and the developer web client or mobile web client, you will also get a binary update, of course. And the client installation currently enforces the SE2 installation, the Oracle SE2 for the mobile database, not for the local database for developers. We no longer use that, but for the mobile web client, which until 21.3 also affects the developer web client. So you have to go through that, but then you can deactivate the SE2 database afterwards. So that is mandatory, of course, to update all of your Siebel bits and pieces to 21.3 or higher if you are looking at this video in the future. Also mandatory is running the post-install database update utility, either automatically as part of the MDE when you update your first SES, or manually if you skip it, but you have to run it once per database or per environment. So once in the development environment, once for test, once for production. And there's a report, you should verify that, review the log files. The post-install database update has to run successfully and completely. Then you decide, as we have discussed, to run the repository upgrade manually. That only would apply to DR environments, as the changes that the repository upgrade utility imports into your repository and into your seed data will be migrated using the migration app to runtime repository environments. So you only run, if at all, the repository upgrade in DR environments. You would verify the release notes and see what features have been between your old version and the new version that you are dependent on the repository upgrade utility. And if there are none, you don't run it. There will be a new integration workspace, which you have to manually inspect, deliver, verify, validate, and then, of course, after delivery, make sure everything's migrated to RR. Also, if you look into the release notes, there are sometimes configuration instructions for certain bug fixes. You have to make changes to, let's say, business objects or workflow processes. So make sure you apply these configuration instructions where necessary. And the same goes for the known issues section in the release notes. So make sure you read them thoroughly and understand the implications and apply, if necessary, any workarounds that are documented in the release notes. And then you have a successful update to 21.3 or higher. Thank you very much for listening, and bye-bye.